Welcome to the Birth Boot Camp podcast, your trusted guide on your journey through pregnancy, birth, and beyond. I'm Holly, your host, along with Cheryl, Megan, and Liana that make up the Birth Boot Camp headquarters team. Together, we are here to explore the amazing world of childbirth and family wellness. Each week, we'll dive into empowering conversations with expert guests and share practical insights and heartfelt stories to support you on your unique path to parenthood. Whether you're expecting your first baby, you're a seasoned doula or childbirth educator, or simply curious about the miracle of birth, you're in the right place. Together, we'll celebrate the beauty of birth, honor the strength of motherhood, and embrace the joy of new beginnings. So sit back, relax, and join us on the Birth Boot Camp podcast, where every birth is amazing, every family is supported, and every story matters. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Birth Boot Camp podcast. I'm Holly Hopley, the CEO.
And I'm Megan Busk, the head of marketing.
And today we are really excited because we have a special guest with us. We have Jen McClellan from Plus Size Birth, and I've been excited because I have followed you for forever. So if you're not following her, go check out her stuff and follow her. But she's a certified childbirth educator, but she's an expert in plus size pregnancy, and you've been doing this for over a decade now. And so as somebody who I have been plus size with all four of my kids and had really great experiences, I didn't realize the struggle that some women have during their pregnancy and birth and stuff like that, just simply because of their size. And so I consider myself super lucky that I didn't. But before we kind of get into all of that, will you just kind of tell us a little bit more about yourself, kind of how you got into this work, what you love about it, any fun things you want us to know about you?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Holly and Megan, and the Birth Boot Camp community. I'm so excited to be here and honored. I got into this work like I think a lot of birth professionals, my own birth experience. I got pregnant in 2010 and went online on Google and read all these really just upsetting things about being pregnant in a larger body. And it was like, you will develop gestational diabetes, you will have a cesarean birth, you're a horrible person for wanting to be a parent in a larger body. And I was like, wait, what? Like, it was just so shocking to me that I was just wanting to know where I could find cute maternity clothes and how to have a healthy pregnancy, right? And I did those things. I found the clothes and I had the healthy pregnancy, and I connected with a doula that introduced me to the midwifery model of care. And I gave birth on my knees in a hospital, and I was forever changed. And I was like, surely I'm not the first, I use the word fat, but plus size or whatever word you use. Like, I'm not the first fat woman to give birth on her knees and have a positive experience and be treated with compassion and dignity by the medical community. Mm-hmm. But it just seemed like a narrative that wasn't around at the time. And so I started a blog that changed my life, and it blew up really quickly. And I became certified as a childbirth educator and started traveling the country, educating birth professionals. And it's been a wild ride for 13 years now. And I'm just so honored to know that it was just a little bit of telling my own story and quickly realizing, oh, this isn't about me. This is about a whole lack of resources out there. So that's a really quick snippet of me and my work.
Mm-hmm. That's fabulous. Yeah, that's perfect. I was always curious kind of what got you started. So, and that's like my story was very similar in that, like, I had this really great experience, but then to hear all these other people be like, yeah, no, I didn't. And I was like, oh my goodness. So
yeah. And at the time, I think now we're more cognizant of like biases that people hold, and we talk about that, and we're all trying to unpack our biases. But at the time, it was like weight bias was acceptable. And in still today's society, unfortunately, it is more acceptable than other biases. So a lot has changed, but there's still a lot of harm happening, and we have those studies to back it up now. And we didn't have those studies until recently, specifically on weight bias and maternity care. They didn't start coming out until 2020. Like,
wow, my goodness.
We've had studies about weight bias in healthcare for a very long time. And we've known for a long time that when someone feels shamed by their care provider, they are less likely to receive routine health care and more likely to gain weight. So we've known for
Wow.
so long that shame is not an effective tool. But I think for people of all sizes listening, most of us have experienced some level of body shaming, whether you exist in a larger body or not. And unfortunately, through healthcare, right? Like the focus is always about one number and not our overall health. So it's been good to have the data to back it up and be like, okay, we need to address this and create change.
I love that. What are some ways that being plus size, other than like seeing that shame affecting plus size women, like what are some other things that impact pregnant plus size women?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people want to feel cute and have clothes that fit their body during pregnancy. And while, you know, a lot of clothes and even our own clothes can fit throughout pregnancy, a lot of maternity clothes cap out at 2X. And you're just like, that's not enough, right? Like people of all sizes get pregnant, and yet it can be so hard to even find a nursing bra in a larger size that'll fit appropriately. And we know like you need things that fit appropriately, especially for nursing or pumping. And so that's really frustrating that still to this day, the maternity clothing companies out there haven't realized that 60% of people who get pregnant 60% of people in the United States who can become pregnant are either classified, and I don't like BMI, and there's a lot we can unpack around it, but they're classified as overweight or that other O word. And I try not to use a lot, but since we're talking about BMI, I will, or obese. And of that, 39% are in that obese category. So we're looking at a majority of people that don't exist within that normal BMI range, and yet the clothing is all curtailed to people in smaller bodies. But not only that, the medical equipment, right? If you exist in a larger body, there are smaller necessities like a blood pressure cuff that fits, mesh undies that fit if you're giving birth in a hospital, right? To much larger necessities like monitoring equipment that works better for larger bodies. And that technology exists. It's not perfect, but there are some monitors that are designed for larger bodies, but there's not a training being done around them, and they're expensive. So there's maybe one, and it's the Novi wireless monitor that was designed for larger bodies. There's maybe one on a labor and delivery unit. So a lot of what I do is empower people to advocate for themselves, to ask questions early on, like where I'm giving birth. Do they have wireless monitors? Do they have a Novi? You can bring your belly band with you for non-stress tests and when you're in labor, because a belly band can help to hold those monitors in place, because things like monitoring can just be a little more tricky when we exist in larger bodies. And the technology around monitoring is frustrating for people of all sizes, as any birth professional would agree with. So a lot of little things that we just don't take people in consideration. But when we realize that it is the majority of people, I think that's why we need to be having, we need to be having this conversation, even if it wasn't the majority. But to me, it's even more so of a reason of why aren't we having this conversation?
Yeah, that makes total sense to me.
Absolutely. And I love that you bring in all of those details. I'm like almost 6'2" and plus size. So like the combination is a double whammy for me. Like trying to find clothes or anything really is like impossible. So I love that you are spreading the word that this is an issue and something that we as in the birth community need to be talking more about. I love that.
Thanks. Yeah. And I've had some bigger maternity brands reach out, and I've done some consulting, and they're like, oh, but Jen, we did a run of 3X. I'm like, did you market it? I'm glad it was on your website, but I was not aware that you big X brand did a run up to 3X. And if I'm not aware of it, and I've got Google alerts set up and all the things, like, how do you expect consumers to find it and buy it? And yet you ran it and it wasn't successful. So you're like, there isn't a need. And I'm like, but you're not putting the same marketing behind
Yeah.
clothing for people in
Yeah.
larger bodies. And I think clothing is just a small example, but a very important one, right? Because we
Mhm.
want to feel good in our bodies. And people of all sizes, sometimes want that obnoxious belly band built into the jeans. It's like a rite of pregnancy passage. And when you don't have one that fits you, it can make you start to feel like there's something wrong with your body, which there isn't. And so that plants seeds in how you advocate for yourself in healthcare, what you feel like your projection, your trajectory of your pregnancy will be like, right? If you don't feel like you are welcome, or there's all these barriers, or you want to give birth at a birth center but there's BMI restrictions, and then you can't find the clothes that fit, it really starts to plant these seeds that aren't true. There are increased risks when you exist in a larger body, but they're so much smaller than society leads us to believe. And there's no one thing that people in larger bodies incur, right? There's not one thing just because you exist in a larger body. People of all sizes have risks during pregnancy. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it is important that we talk about clothes just as important as we talk about monitoring.
Mhm. And to me, the clothes too, when we can't find those clothes and we can't feel good, that leads to so many other issues that I'm like, but it all starts back with being able to just find clothes to wear,
Yep.
which sounds simple, but it has a bigger impact.
Yeah.
So, something I really wanted to talk about is like trying to find a care provider who is, size friendly, or whatever term you want to use, because I think that that's something we talk a lot about. Is I'm like, your care provider will really affect your pregnancy and birth. And so can you kind of talk through like how can we find care providers that will take care of us?
Yeah, and Holly, size friendly is the perfect word, right? Size friendly or size inclusive. So to me, that's a care provider or a doula or any type of professional that has worked through or worked on their weight bias, and they practice evidence-based compassionate care, right? And that should be the basis for all
Yeah.
Right,
for
like
all
everybody should do that.
providers and birth professionals. Like I often say, when people want to have a VBAC, a vaginal birth after cesarean, like you want to find a VBAC friendly provider, right? So you want to find a size friendly care provider who can support you and your needs. Well, how do you do that? And I think it starts with asking around, asking your plus size friends if they've had babies, like, did you like your care provider? Joining local moms Facebook groups can be a wealth of information because it's a hyper focus to your area. And if you feel comfortable posting, hey, I'm plus size, I'm pregnant, or I'm plus size and I'm trying to conceive, does anyone have a care provider that made you feel good about your body? Or if you want to say size friendly or whatever it is, whatever language you want to use to get to the core of someone who treated you with kindness and practiced evidence-based medicine, right? Because we unfortunately have some care providers that make assumptions about people's bodies, that will test people not just twice or three times for gestational diabetes, but like monthly. I mean, there's a lot of biases that impact your overall care. So once you have a few people in mind, you can call the office and ask some questions like, do you have larger blood pressure cuffs? Even asking, do you have any BMI restrictions? Because, a lot of birth centers do. So that's something to ask. Some midwifery programs do. Even some rural hospitals have BMI restrictions. So that can be a quick way to rule out some places, but ask, like, do you have larger gowns? Like, and really listen to the tone of the person who's answering those questions. Are they like, oh yes, we have, equipment to meet the needs of everyone? Or are they like, well, maybe I think we have one in the back office. You can start to get those little hints. And so once you've kind of narrowed it down even further, then you make that appointment. Or even, can you show up and just scope out the place? And by doing that, checking to see, is the lobby accommodating? Are there chairs without arms? Can you sit comfortably? Like, to me, that is the basis of size inclusivity, is chairs without arms, because if you can't sit down, then you don't feel welcome. And clearly, if they haven't even thought about seating, then what else haven't they thought about, right?
Mhm.
So if you can scope it out early, but I know a lot of us are busy, but for that first appointment, scope it out and then really pay attention to how you're treated. Are you told to just get on the scale, or are you asked if you want to be weighed? What is the tone? How are you, trusting our guts? Our intuition is so important. And then asking that care provider in the 9.5 minutes you get with them, unfortunately.
Right.
Usually the first prenatal longer, but you don't get a lot of time with the actual provider saying, you know, what is your experience supporting people in larger bodies? Do you have any special protocols or procedures that you're going to recommend for me during my pregnancy? Because you want to know early on if they're like, well, yes, everyone who has a BMI over 30 or 35, I'm going to recommend an induction at 39 weeks. And that's not necessarily an evidence-based recommendation based only on
Mhm.
BMI. So to me, that's like, that's a little red flag. But for someone else, that might be great. That's what I want. So you want to find the provider that is the right fit for you. And I think those are just some ways to narrow it down, ask some questions, make observations, and then ultimately trust your gut. And I have a free guide over on plussizebirth.com where it goes into all of this on how to find a size-friendly care provider, and then more questions you can ask too, because it is so important. Those are the two questions I get asked most is, where can I find cute and affordable plus size maternity clothes? And where do I find a size-friendly care provider? So I think, it is really important, as you said, Holly, but also not just the provider, but also where you're choosing to give birth.
Mhm.
Asking questions about what is their cesarean birth rate? What is their monitoring setup? All of those questions, I feel like, are just as important because
Yep.
we don't often know if we're going to get our care provider, right? For
Yeah.
our birth. So all those little things are so important.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
so
what we say
great.
is the top two, is your care provider and your birthplace.
Mhm.
So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're so important. Now, you talked a little bit about like gestational diabetes tests and how sometimes care providers are going to be testing you more often because if you're plus size, that's just something that they do. Are there other tests or procedures that maybe looked at differently being a plus sized?
Yeah, so the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists sets out guidelines and safeguards around maternity care. And there are some recommendations for people in larger bodies, including early screening for gestational diabetes, which means very early on in pregnancy. There was a new study that came out that actually showed it wasn't really effective to screen people that early on in pregnancy. And in fact, there were some maybe negative connotations of over interventions happening because of that. So I think there's a lot of recommendations, but there's a lot of new studies, and you need to have these conversations with your care provider. Because if you go into pregnancy already knowing your A1Cs and knowing that you're not pre-diabetic, then do you really need to be screened at like 12 weeks of pregnancy or 9 weeks of pregnancy when you're not pre-diabetic or diabetic? Because you will be screened around 24 to 28 weeks when everyone does, because that's when we most often catch gestational diabetes, which changes with the placenta. But they're wanting to check early on because there's that, higher risk of pre-diabetic and diabetic, and we want to catch it early on in pregnancy, which is so important, right? Absolutely. But if you already know, hey, just because I'm a big gal doesn't mean that I am automatically pre-diabetic. So all that to say, there are recommendations, but there are questions you can ask and conversations with your care provider, because even that recommendation by ACOG is listed in their class C category, which means there's not a lot of evidence to back up the recommendation. So just know that you want to look into things deeper. Other recommendations from ACOG is non-stress testing, more of that nearing the end of pregnancy. A lot of what we'd see for people having a high-risk pregnancy, so more surveillance. And, if there are questions about fetal macrosomia, which is a bigger baby, then if we want to be doing an extra ultrasound or questions or concerns about positioning, we want to do extra ultrasounds. If there are concerns, then more non-stress tests, yes. But I think these are conversations that you want to be having with your provider of, or is this something you automatically are going to want me to do? Or is this something we can talk about during the end of pregnancy? If you have any concerns, then we can do it. Or maybe you're in the other camp of, I want all the tests, I want all the screening, and I'm cheering you on too, right?
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of good recommendations, but I think a lot of them are rooted in assumptions of people's bodies being high risk and always having complications because of their size. And
Yeah.
that's where we go back to the importance of connecting with that size-friendly care provider, because ACOG does not state that just because someone exists in a larger body, that they should automatically be classified as high risk. And yet we see that time and time again because care providers can set their own guidelines and standards, which is why I said that's one of those important questions to ask early on. And I hope you've heard me say this a few times now. I support whatever you want for your body and your baby.
Mhm.
And so does,
Mhm.
Holly and Megan too. Like, we want you to make the choices that are the best for you, but we want them to be informed choices. And I
Yep.
feel so often we're not really being told everything. And we're just like, well, because your BMI is this, you need to do X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
So yeah.
I love that.
I
And
think that
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I wish, and I think medical care in general should be this way, but especially during pregnancy, it's so individualized,
Mhm.
to put just blanket statements on there. Cause it does, I see so many, like moms in Facebook groups where they're like, I'm considered high risk. And I'm like, well, why?
Yeah.
And they can't even really say why. They're like, I don't really know. And you definitely see that is, oh, just because of my BMI, I'm considered high risk.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for just 1 second, because I'm sure there's people listening being like, well, I want all the testing and all the screening, and if they say I need this, let's do it. And again, I support you. But let's think about the time, the money, missing work, finding childcare, paying those co-pays. All those things add up. Do you have transportation? So for some people, yeah, it's really easy and accessible to go, and how amazing to hear your baby's heartbeat those extra times, right? But for some people, this is a huge strain and stress on themselves and stress during pregnancy. And
Mhm.
is this really medically necessary? That is the question that you need to be asking your care
Mhm.
provider.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
There was something that you brought up, and just being able to know like your body and know what your options are. And I want to know from you, like, what can plus size women do prior to becoming pregnant, prior to finding their care provider, so that they know what their options are in relation to their bodies? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, let's say, so often when we talk about trying to conceive as a person in a larger body, the focus is weight loss.
Yeah.
Like, most care providers are going to say, okay, I'm going to pull out this BMI chart and I want you to lose, let's start with like 10% or something. And that number, or just focusing on that one number, can cause the opposite. It can cause
Mhm.
a lot of stress, reduce, to release cortisol, which will actually make us retain weight. We can immediately jump into restrictive eating behaviors that might work for a short time, but then we end up gaining more weight, right? Like, we have all these studies around just what dieting can do.
Yeah.
And now people are choosing to take weight loss medication, which totally your body, your choice, but just know you don't want to be taking this when you're pregnant. So
Mhm.
there's no studies around it during pregnancy. So being very mindful and careful of that. But what I tell people, because the focus so often existing in a larger body is, I want to do a preconception screening, right? Which, for people who are planning to get pregnant, not just, oh, I'm pregnant.
Mhm.
It is encouraged to do that preconception visit. So making sure that you're connecting with a care provider that's looking at your whole health and not just that one number on the scale. So I encourage people to connect with a nutritionist, because I think for so often, especially people who have a history of disordered eating, and that can be people of all sizes, right? We have such warped ideas of nutrition. And I think especially people of size, with many people know every diet, not everyone, but you've done all the things. So So to actually learn how to eat intuitively, how to listen to your body. What does your body need? What food allergies do you maybe have that you've never investigated? Like, to work with a nutritionist, and especially if you can, a health at every size nutritionist, I think can be really effective. Finding a form of joyful movement before you're even pregnant. So something that you'll continuously go work on throughout pregnancy, because we know the benefits of physical activity for everyone, but especially during pregnancy, it's going to reduce our increased risk, including that gestational diabetes that is increased, especially for people in larger bodies. So finding something now that you enjoy. So if we're looking at our nutrition and we're being physically active and we're finally going to bed on time and not scrolling on our phone for hours, guilty of that, we're taking vitamins, we're working on our blood work with our doctors and working on all of our levels. Weight loss might be a byproduct of all of this, but it's not the focus. So I think optimal health for pregnancy is critical for people of all sizes. I mean, I'm in the camp surprise pregnancy too. So like, like, oh, I tried for so long, it never happened. And then, oh, I'm pregnant. Oh, darn, I wasn't doing all those things I was doing. So I think for many of us, that's the story, right? But for those of us that are planning and trying to conceive, trying not to just focus on that one number and overall wellness, and connecting with that size-friendly care provider early before you even get pregnant, I think is fantastic too. So I'm not sure if that quite answered it for
Yeah,
you.
no, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to kind of like shift the conversation kind of to more of that like body image stuff during pregnancy, because I know I struggled with it. And that's actually like, because I didn't feel like I looked pregnant, and I didn't. The only time I had maternity pictures taken was with my first, and that's one of my biggest regrets, is that I didn't take pictures when I was pregnant. So I kind of want to like dive into that,
Yes, let's
side
do
of
it.
things, because I love like your Instagram. Like I love that you post so many pictures. And I think we need to see more of that.
Yes. I mean, I have the same regrets, Holly. I didn't get professional maternity photos taken because I didn't see people my size pregnant, right? So when I started my blog, sharing images of plus size pregnancy was so important to me. I remember scrolling through Google Images for hours just trying to find and to see someone's head too. Like I'd see cut from the neck down larger bodies. But to see someone smiling and feeling proud and confident in their body, that was so lacking for me. And unfortunately, as you pointed out, it's still kind of lacking, right? So that is so important to me, because when we go through pregnancy as someone who's plus size, our pregnancy often doesn't align with those weekly newsletters you get of like, oh, you'll start feeling flutters. And you're like, I don't feel flutters. Oh, your bump is starting to pop. I already had a bump and it's not really popping. Like it starts to feel like, again, as we talked earlier, is there something wrong with me, right? And there's not. Our bodies are all so different and diverse. And unfortunately, society kind of tells us that pregnancy is only thin white women with this perfectly round belly and no stretch marks. And the minute they pop out their baby, their belly goes flat again. And I won't cuss because I don't think we do that on the show, but that's a bunch of BS. Right? Like that is total BS. Like that is so far from the truth for people of all sizes. I mean, society has really given us a warped vision of so many things, but especially around pregnancy. Very often during pregnancy, you might have a belly that looks more like a B shape when you stand to the side than a D shape. A B shaped belly is really common, but no one talks about it, right?
Yeah.
And so all of those things are important. So when we see images of people that look like us, we realize that there's nothing wrong with our bodies, and it helps us to love our bodies a little bit more. And one thing that I developed recently was a week by week pregnancy breakdown, because I'm like, this is needed because again, our pregnancies don't often align with that weekly thing. So let's have one for plus size pregnancy. So I have that free on my website that you can get a weekly newsletter, kind of knowing what to expect with tips around self-advocacy and body image and all of that stuff, because it's just so important, because our bodies are amazing. And I think like a bee belly is a beautiful belly, right? Like, but it can
Mhm.
be hard to feel that way. And I know that for sure. I had a bee belly too, and it can be hard to love it and embrace it. But what I try to remind people of continuously is your body is growing your baby. And how amazing is that? Do you know how healthy you have to be? You know, all the incredible things that your body is doing. And it's such an opportunity during pregnancy to change your relationship with your body, your relationship with nutrition and physical activity, because during pregnancy, it's not about weight loss, it's about health, right? So,
Mhm.
can we continue to sustain that even after pregnancy? Of, oh, I want to nourish my body with all these great foods because they make me feel good versus because they'll bring the scale down, because we're going to be teaching our kids about body image, and we don't want our kids to be hyper focused on dieting and the scale and all of that. So I think pregnancy can be an incredible time to unpack a lot of different things.
I love that. I just, I think that's a great way to put it all. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, so now let's kind of talk to our doulas that we have listening, doulas, childbirth educators, other birth professionals. I like, what do they need to know about this topic? What would be something that's really helpful for them?
Yeah, I think like we've talked about in the beginning, there's a lot of little nuances that we just might not realize or think about. Like, for example, if you are a doula that provides a birth ball, which for people listening, it's also an exercise ball, right? Do
Mhm.
you know the weight limit of that ball? Do you know if it's anti-burst or not? Most of them are now. But if you purchased your ball at Target or Walmart, odds are it goes up to 250 to 300 pounds. If you purchase one on Amazon or other like fitness sites, it can go all the way up to holding like 1,000 pounds, right? So just being really cognizant of the equipment you're using, the people that you are recommending to your clients, like chiropractors, lactation consultants, anyone within your kind of reference list. Have you really vetted them to see if they are size inclusive? Have you gone to that chiropractor that everyone loves office and looked at their lobby and made sure that they have size inclusive seating? All of those things. You know, how are we supporting people during pregnancy with compassion and dignity and helping them to look out for those red flags of a provider that has those size biases? Uh, in working through our own biases as well, I think is so incredibly important. Like, I do a lot of public speaking, and I'm always the first to say, I hold weight biases, and I'm a big girl that does this work. Like, we all have biases, and especially for people in larger bodies, it's a lot of internalized weight
Mhm.
bias. So unpacking that is critical to be able to really support people. And I think overall, most, you know, birth professionals are size friendly, but taking it to that next step and really becoming educated to be size inclusive, I think is so incredibly important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. The fact that you talked about like the tools that we're offering, because even as like someone who is tall, like there are so many different
Yeah.
things that like take into account a person's body and like tools that are going to be able to be best suited for them in the positions that are going to be helping them the most throughout labor and delivery. And just being aware of how that makes a difference is so important.
Yeah. And then how are you marketing your business? Like, that's
Yeah.
another thing, is like looking at the imagery that you're using, not only on your website, but also social media. So if you're like, I support people of all sizes, but I come to your, you know, gorgeous Instagram feed and I only see, you know, thin bodies, I don't think you support me, right? I don't feel like
Hmm.
you'd be the right person I'd want to work with. So how are you also marketing yourself? And marketing yourself, again, is not just putting a picture of a plus size person on your Instagram. Like, you want to make sure you've done the work and unpacked it. But it's those things that we don't often think about. We often are like, ooh, this is gorgeous stock photo or a photo I purchased from a birth photographer. I'm going to use this. We're really thinking of like, well, who is being represented within your work? And are you truly being as diverse as you say that you are? And diversity in numerous ways, right? Not just body size.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. I love that.
And
Are there
I'll just-
trainings that you recommend, or just, I mean, I know you said you public speak, so that's like a huge benefit, is being able to hear what you have to say as well, because you've been doing this for so long. But are there other trainings or anything that you recommend?
Well, that was a fantastic question, Megan, because I just launched, that wasn't planned. I just launched a size friendly birth course, which is size inclusivity training for birth professionals, and it has 6 contact hours. So you can either get nursing contact hours, it's been approved for nursing contact hours, or general contact hours for taking this course. And then you can also be listed in a size friendly directory once you've completed the course as well. So yes, I have all of that.
Awesome.
Over on
I love it.
Birth, yeah. Over on plussizebirth.com, you'll see either parents or professionals. So wherever you land. And then I have a ton of free resources too, of course. But yes, that size inclusivity training was what I just dropped this year. And it has been a complete labor of love.
I'm sure.
So much into it because I couldn't believe it ended up being 6.5 hours, but I'm just like there was just so much I wanted to share and teach about not only unpacking our own weight biases, but how are we supporting people? How are we evaluating environments? How are we writing a size inclusive policy statement for your business? Like all the things. Because I think it's really, really important if we say that we're size friendly, that we've actually done the work as well. So yeah, I got that.
You got it all.
Up on this.
And we'll include a link in the description down below as well, so that everyone can be able to go right to your website. So that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has been so helpful. I hadn't actually, I mean, like I followed you and I didn't realize you had published a course. So I'm like, well, okay, I guess I need to go sign up for that.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Where do I sign up?
Yeah, I have a group rate too. So
Okay.
it brings it down to like, I think it's like $15 per unit, which is so affordable.
Okay.
I really wanted it to be accessible because I think that is so important as well. So yeah.
Mhm. All right,
Absolutely.
maybe we'll just get a big group of us together then. And we'll all do it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been so good. It was so great to finally connect with you and get to know you and chat some more. So, all right, everybody, if you have, if you're listening and have questions, feel free to send them to us and we can kind of get those messages over to Jen, or just, go to her Instagram and go follow her. And
yeah, you can find me for all things plus size pregnancy on Plus Size Birth. And since you're listening to a podcast, I will also let you know that I am the host of the Plus Mommy podcast that has been called one of the best pregnancy podcasts by The Bump. So I've got a lot of great content around for anyone who's plus size, really, or people who support people in larger bodies. So the tagline is from bumps to bellies. We talk about it all. So a lot around plus size pregnancy, but also fat advocacy. And I get to interview like fun people from like The Voice and America's Got Talent who exist in larger bodies and hear their journey as well. And then lastly, I wanted to mention for anyone who is pregnant and plus size or becoming pregnant and plus size, I have the My Plus Size Pregnancy Guide and audiobook that will walk you through everything of what to expect during a plus size pregnancy and more of those advocacy tips. So I've been doing this for 13 years and I literally set out to create everything that I couldn't find when I was plus size and pregnant.
Like that would have been so good to have when I was having my babies, but
yeah. Well, thank you. And I mentioned this offline before we started recording, but I've followed Birth Boot Camp since you guys came to be. Like it's really an honor to be on your show too, because I've really admired all of the work that you guys do. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah. Well, we are just so grateful that you were willing to do it. So
thank you. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks for listening, everybody. And be sure to tune in next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Birth Boot Camp podcast. We're so grateful to have you as a part of our community. If you enjoyed today's episode and found it valuable, we'd love to hear from you. please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more families on their journey through pregnancy and birth. As a token of our appreciation, we're excited to offer you our exclusive birth plan blueprint. Inside, you'll find expert guidance and a template to help you create a birth plan that reflects your preferences and desires for your birthing experience. Simply click the link below in the episode description to have your blueprint sent right to your inbox. Remember, your birth plan is a powerful tool for communication and advocacy during labor and delivery. Don't miss this opportunity to take control of your birthing experience and advocate for the birth you envision. Thank you again for listening. Be sure to subscribe, and we look forward to sharing more amazing insights and stories with you in our next episode.